So the talk today is on the notion of introversion and quiet creativity. And it has very much to do with the book that you're reading this week, the book by Susan Cain called Quiet. And so we're really going to flesh the ideas in that book out a little more in particular as they do with creativity. The subtitle of this book, Quiet, is The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking. And she's very interested in how in the world did the big talkers begin to kind of rule the world. How did extroversion become a kind of cultural ideal? And it's a great book, and we just are reading one chapter out of it. But in the larger book, she talks about how this notion of extroversion really came out of an era in the 20th century that promoted business. And when you're promoting business, you tend to have a little hype there. And it's about salesmanship. And it was really the growth of business and salesmanship and public relations in the middle of the 20th century that then significantly transformed our attitude about what kind of personality is appealing in a human being. And she says that America has shifted, and she gets this idea from this cultural historian named Warren Sussman, and she quotes him a lot in the book. And Warren Sussman says that we have gone from a culture of character to a culture of personality. So in that period in the 20th century, we went from revering certain personality characteristics in people to certain other ones. He mentions that the word personality didn't really exist in the English language until the 18th century, and that the notion of having a good personality was not really a common idea until the 20th century. So this is a fairly recent phenomenon. And according to Sussman now, the culture of personality requires that every American becomes a kind of performing self, so that rather than just being ourselves, we feel this need to project a personality, an image, a character that is important in the culture we live in today. Now, this is a very interesting parallel set of words that talk about, this is what Sussman refers to as a culture of character, and this is what he refers to as a culture of personality. So in a culture of character, you judge people by their citizenship, by their sense of duty, by their work ethic. Are they honorable? What is their reputation? Their reputation is very key in a culture of character. What are their moral standards? Do they stick with those standards? Do they have good manners? Do they treat people well? Do they have integrity? Can you depend on them? So all of these things are about a culture of character. And according to Sussman, this is like the way the world's worked for millennia. And the way you chose your friends was you were looking for people who were honorable, who had a good reputation, who had integrity. If you're going to get married to somebody, oh my God, of course you would want someone who has a good work ethic and who has good morals and who has good manners, treats people well. Those were criteria that you used for judging people. And that was true for millennia. But Warren Sussman says now, since maybe the middle of the 20th century, we begin to morph to a culture of personality. And now we tend to judge people by other words like, are they magnetic? Are we drawn to them? Are they fascinating? Are they interesting to us? Are they stunning? Do they look good? Are they attractive? Are they glowing? Do they have energy and vitality? Are they dominant? Do they make themselves known when they walk into a room? Do you notice them? Are they charismatic? Are they forceful? Do they tend to get their way and dominate? Are they energetic? Is there a lot of vitality and energy in them? And that now, maybe when we're choosing friends, we're looking for people who are attractive and who are dominant and who are energetic. Maybe when we're looking for a spouse, we're looking for someone who's stunning, who's glowing, who's forceful, and that now we've completely changed what we value in human beings. Now, I am fascinated by those two lists that Sussman generated. And I think this is interesting, and maybe we can talk about this in our check-in. But I would like for you to think, are you more interested in those words, in engendering those characteristics yourself, or in having friends or relationships with people who have those characteristics? Or are you more interested in these? And what kind of balance do you see between them? Do you think that we have gone from maybe in your grandparents' generation being more interested in that, and in your generation being more interested in this? And Sussman uses a lot of cultural media as a way of documenting this. One thing that strikes me, and I don't really know this series, but they're the housewives of whatever, Manhattan or LA or whatever. They're these TV shows. And the only exposure I've had to them is I sometimes see them on the TV in the gym, because one of those shows is on at the time I work out. Yeah, man, they're all over these characteristics. And in fact, in some ways, they kind of laugh at and they make fun of people with these characteristics. So definitely in media, that tends to be there. If you think of the reality TV shows like, Fantasy Island, or what is that? Anyway, these shows that you have a group of people and they get voted off the island, or Bachelor and Bachelorette. What are they really looking for? Who wins on the island? Who is the big winner there? Is it someone with high moral standards and a good work ethic and real integrity? Or is it someone who's forceful and dominant and maybe fascinating? In The Bachelor and the Bachelorette, what are they using to choose who they want to hang out with? Are they looking for people with a good reputation and a good sense of duty? Are they looking for people who are glowing and stunning and magnetic? So, it's just a question here. But Susan Cain is interested in this because she thinks that this has changed how we look at extroverts and how we look at introverts in our culture. She goes back to a period in the middle of the 20th century where this guy, Dale Carnegie, had an enormous impact on American thinking. He wrote a series of books. The most famous one was this one, How to Win Friends and Influence People. But he was a big speaker on the lecture circuit, and he began to convince business people in particular that you got to work on your personality, and you've got to have some of these characteristics of a culture of personality in order to be a successful business person. And he himself changed from a farm boy to a championship salesman and public speaking icon. His journey reflected a kind of cultural evolution that reached a tipping point around the turn of the 20th century and kind of changed forever who we admire, who we look for in a job interview, what kind of employees we want, how to court our mates, how to raise our children, what kind of characteristics we want them to have. So it's a different scene maybe than it was before. So Susan Cain says that even businesses that employ artists and designers and imaginative types that you wouldn't think necessarily need to have big personalities often display a preference for extroverted people. So she's interviewing one of these HR people in a company like that, and the person says, we want to attract creative people. And when Susan Cain asked, well, exactly what do you mean by creative? She answered without missing a beat, you have to be outgoing, fun, jazzed up to work here. So for her, creative was associated with a certain kind of personality trait, being an extrovert. Susan Cain says, if we assume that quiet and loud people have roughly the same number of good ideas, and then if we let the loudmouths prevail, are we missing out on some really good ideas that come from more introverted people, but they get squashed while the other ones prevail just because of the loudmouth personality of that person? Susan Cain says studies in group dynamics suggest that's exactly what happens, that we perceive talkers as smarter and quiet types, even though as less smart, even though grade point averages, SAT scores, intelligence tests say that's not true. There is not that difference. So there's one experiment she cites where two strangers meet over the phone, and they're just talking on the phone. And those people who were more talkative, more outgoing, were considered to be more intelligent. This is interesting. Better looking, although they couldn't see them. But if they were fast talkers and they were energetic, they perceived that they were good looking and that they would be better leaders. It also says, Susan Cain observes, it also helps to speak fast. We rate quick talkers as more capable and appealing than slow talkers. We think they're smarter somehow if they talk quicker. So they had this study done on college students where they were asked to solve math problems together and then to rate one another's intelligence and judgment. So you have a small group of people and they're solving math problems together. The students who spoke up first and more often were considered to be more intelligent, and they were considered to be better at solving those math problems, even though their actual scores and what they did were not better than the less talkative students. The very same students were given similarly high ratings for creativity and analytical powers during a separate exercise to develop a business strategy for a startup company. Just the louder students tended to be perceived as the more successful, the ones you want to really have in your company. So Susan Cain makes an argument that a sophisticated society needs both introverts and extroverts, and it needs to respect them equally. So she observes that once in a while you'll see a TV program or a newspaper profile about animals. And they'll even cast the animal personalities. The more outgoing animals are attractive and admirable, and the quieter animals are less so. But this evolutionary psychologist, David Sloan Wilson, makes the point that actually that's not true in the animal world at all. That it is not true that more extroverted animals are more successful, or that a species with more extroverted animals are more successful. So he's working with this, he has this pool of pumpkin seed fish, and he puts this trap in it, a metal trap. And the extroverted pumpkin seed fish are super curious, and they run over immediately, and of course they get trapped. But the shyer and more introverted pumpkin seed fish hold off, and they see the extroverted ones getting trapped, and so they're secure, they're safe. They don't get trapped. But then if you eventually do get all the fish together and you put them in this new environment, then the extroverted fish will adjust to the new environment faster than the introverted fish. At the beginning, the introverted fish, they won't even eat. They're freaked out. but the extroverted fish adapt 5 days earlier than their shy brethren. And what that makes him conclude as an evolutionary psychologist is that there's no single best animal personality. A species needs a diversity of personalities maintained by natural selection in order to be a successful species. So Susan Cain takes this as evidence. Yeah, maybe we can learn that about the animal in us as human beings. We need all kinds of people. So as regards problem solving in particular, introverts have been shown to excel at something psychologists call insightful problem solving. There are some characteristics of problem solving that introverts are much better at. They're not smarter than extroverts. The two types of people are equally intelligent. But at some kinds of tasks, particularly those performed over time or under social pressure or involving multitasking, their extroverts are actually better. So at some situations, extroverts are better. In some situations, introverts are better. Introverts seem to think more carefully than extroverts. And the psychologist Gerald Matthews describes that in a book that he's written. Extroverts are much likely to take a kind of quick and dirty answer to the problem, and they trade accuracy for speed, and they make a lot of mistakes as they go along. They also have less patience, and they abandon ship when the problem seems too difficult or frustrating. Introverts, on the other hand, they think before they act. They digest information much more thoroughly. They stay on task longer. They have more patience. They give up less easily, and they work more accurately than extroverts do. So Susan Cain isn't saying we need all introverts. She's saying extroverts have some problem-solving capabilities that introverts don't, but introverts have some problem-solving capabilities that give them an advantage over extroverts as well. She says it's as if extroverts are seeing what is, while their introverted peers are asking what if. There's a little more curiosity, a little more depth in the introverts. According to Susan Cain, and this is controversial, I'm not going to 100% embrace her on this, but she thinks that extroverts who engage pretty well in group brainstorming, that actually doesn't work. That actually is overrated. And she points to a study that was done by Marvin Dannett, a psychology professor at the University of Minnesota. And he gathered 48 research scientists and 48 advertising executives. And he had them do these brainstorming exercises. So there are really kind of two things going on here. He thought that the advertising executives were going to be extroverts. The research scientists would be introverts. The advertising executives are going to be good at brainstorming. The introverted research scientists are not going to be good at brainstorming. And he felt like brainstorming was going to produce a whole lot better ideas than people working individually. So he really does two things. He breaks them into, of the 48 people, he gives 12 groups of 4. And he has the research psychologists work with other research psychologists, the advertising executives work with other advertising executives. And at first they're all brainstorming and getting as many good ideas as they can. And he expects that the advertising executive, the extroverts, will be better at this. Well, it turns out, surprise, they're not better at it. You got just as good a brainstorming, just as many good ideas out of the introverts as you did out of the extroverts. And then he said, okay, well, let's not do it brainstorming-wise. Let's break it down and people work individually. And let's see how people come up with ideas when they're not brainstorming, when they're just working individually. And it turned out that they produced ideas of equal or higher quality when they were working as individuals. Both groups, both the introverts and the extroverts. So this is a conclusion that was drawn from that the evidence suggests that business people must be insane to use brainstorming groups. This is Adrian Furnham, another psychologist. If you have talented and motivated people, they should be encouraged to work alone when creativity or efficiency is the highest priority. So I'm saying, I'm not sure I totally agree with that, but that's one perspective, that you don't need to have an extroverted personality to do brainstorming, and that maybe brainstorming is overrated, and that individual work, which introverts are very good at, is equally or more productive. So is the tendency toward introversion or extroversion hardwired into us from birth? Is this something that we can alter, or is it there from birth? And this is interesting work that's been done by Jerome Kagan, who is a professor of psychology at Harvard. This guy he's got a very big reputation. This is someone who's a real expert in his field. And he has this interesting study that's been going. It's a longitudinal study. So he starts when these people are babies, and then he follows them through 30 years of their life. And so in these studies, he followed children from infancy through adolescence, and he's documenting their personalities along the way. So he took a group of 4-month-olds, and he exposed them to new experiences like loud voices and balloons popping, and then he had colorful mobiles, so lots of stimulation. And he's looking at how these 4-month-old babies respond to it. And about 20% of the babies responded by pumping their arms and legs, and they reacted very strongly to it. Probably a kind of upset reaction to it, but they had a high reaction to that stimulus. And then about 40% stayed quiet and placid in the midst of loud noises, balloons popping, and they didn't react so much to it. That's about 40%. Now, this is a little bit counterintuitive, but it makes sense when you think about it. That 20% that had high reactivity, those are your introverts in the future. They are very sensitive to stimulation, and they're upset by stimulation. And so they shy away from stimulation and like to be alone. The low reactivity group, they're not fazed by that balloon popping. They're not fazed by these intensive stimuli. And those are the ones that are extroverts. They're out there putting themselves out in the world, and that's not going to faze them. So the high reactivity group become the introverts. The low reactivity group become the extroverts. And the low reactivity group were more likely to become extroverts with relaxed and confident personalities. And the high reactivity group were more likely to become introverts. Okay, so these high reactivity children, they pay a lot of attention to people and things. They think and feel deeply. So as 4-year-olds, they react to the balloon popping in an extreme way. As they develop, they tend to be people who are very sensitive. They're looking at things and people deeply. And Kagan refers to them as orchid types. They wilt easily, but under the right conditions, they grow very strong and magnificent. He says that orchid children are more strongly affected by all experiences, all the way through their life, be they positive or negative. They're especially vulnerable to challenges like marital tension in their family, or a parent's death, or abuse, and they're more likely than their peers in an event like that to suffer anxiety or depression or shyness. So they're very sensitive people, these ones in the high reactivity introspective group. The high reactivity kids, if they enjoy good parenting and a stable home environment, they tend to have fewer emotional problems than other people, more social skills than their lower reactivity peers, and they're often exceedingly empathetic and caring and cooperative. They're kind, conscientious, and easily disturbed by cruelty, injustice, and irresponsibility. So this is kids that are kind of born with some characteristics that tend to make them introverted, yes, they suffer more if they're put in difficult and trying situations in their family, but if they're raised in a more stable and nurturing environment, they turn out to be these very, very healthy, kind, conscientious human beings. Everything about these high reactivity kids is different. And these physiologically, their eyes dilate more widely when they're solving problems. Their vocal cords become more tense when they're asked to answer a question. Their heart rate patterns are unique and different from the low reactivity group. The footprint of a higher low reactive temperament never disappeared all the way through adulthood. So, is this built into us? Yeah, probably a tendency toward introversion or extroversion is built into us physiologically. And all the way through their lives, introverts salivate more than extroverts when they taste lemon juice. They're more sensitive to that intense taste. Introverts, when asked to adjust the sound levels for comfortable listening, they choose 17 decibels lower than an extrovert. They don't want as intense a stimulus. Introverts sweat more than extroverts do. So physiologically, these kids that start as higher low reactivity children, all the way through their life, they are physiologically and psychologically somewhat different. The tendency toward high reactivity or low reactivity resides in a part of the brain called the amygdala. The amygdala is right in the middle at the base of your brain. It is the oldest part of your brain. The amygdala is what we share with all primates, and it's kind of the most ancient part of the brain. And our inborn temperaments influence us regardless of the lives we lead, but we can stretch our personalities up to a point. So that amygdala is going to tell us something about our behavior, but then we can alter that. And we alter that by using our neocortex, in particular our frontal cortex, that can temper the reactions that occur in the amygdala. So remember that frontal cortex is the more creative part of your brain, but these other parts of your brain can temper whatever reaction you're getting in the amygdala. If you're a high reactivity baby, tend to be an introverted person, then your amygdala may, for the rest of your life, go a bit wild every time you're introduced to a stranger at a cocktail party. So you get a little nervous about it. You're introverted, your amygdala is going crazy, makes you nervous. That's just going to be there. That's your amygdala at work. But if you feel relatively skilled in company, that's partly because your frontal cortex is there to tell you to calm down, stick your hand out, shake their hand, smile, everything's going to be fine. So this is a tendency toward introversion that can be modified by another part of your brain, giving you the ability to display extroverted personality traits. In fact, a recent fMRI study shows that when people use self-talk to reassess upsetting situations, where you're talking to yourself and calming yourself down, the activity in their prefrontal cortex increases in amount correlated with a decrease in activity in the amygdala. The more that your frontal cortex is talking to you and calming you down, the more the activity in the amygdala, which is making you upset, decreases and decreases and decreases. So this is different parts of your brain compensating for that native characteristic that lies in the amygdala. I want you to be thinking and be ready to discuss in the check-in, are you an introvert or are you an extrovert? Were you a high reactivity baby or a low reactivity baby? What is your amygdala telling you? How can you use the inherent strengths of your temperament to make you better at creative problem solving? Those abilities to see deeper, to have more patience, to have more tenacity. All of those qualities can be utilized if you're an introvert. How might you adjust your inherent temperament to get just the results you want? Now, I personally believe that if you have an introverted personality, you will probably have a tendency toward introversion all your life. And it's just a part of who you are. And that can be a very beneficial thing. And it can make you a very creative person. But it also can maybe hold you back in some regards when you get in a situation where you need to present your ideas, you need to be forceful, you need to be dominant, you need to draw people in, you need to be magnetic. You can learn how to have those traits as well. You can display extroverted traits without compromising your introverted personality. And I think we're going to see in the next talk, which is on Eleanor Roosevelt, you'll see an example of someone who maintained her introverted personality, never lost it her entire life, but found out how to deal with that and to get really the maximum benefit from the depth of her introverted personality in terms of creative problem solving, but also could be forceful and magnetic and charismatic and get accomplishments by displaying extroverted traits. So the real trick here is how can we work back and forth between introverted and extroverted personality traits. Now in the check-in, I'm gonna ask you to think about where do I sit on a scale? Let's say from 1 to 10, where 10 is extremely extroverted and 1 is extremely introverted. Where do you think you sit? And where would you like to be? Would you like to, if you're an extrovert, would you like to develop some of those characteristics of an introvert more? Be a little more patient, be a little more thorough, not give up so easily. If you're an introvert, would you like to develop some extrovert traits? Maybe be a little more forceful or a little more dynamic. So we'll be talking about that in check-in. I'll see you later.